What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. In today's episode, I'm previewing the Week 6 action. It's a little bit of a lighter week in terms of really intriguing games, and the one that was billed to be probably the best game of the week is lessened in value a little bit, but it should still be a good week of college football, and these are the weeks where we got to watch out for those big upsets. So before I get into the action for this week, though, if you're going to enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. Getting things started, it's a big one in Tallahassee. Number 3 Miami at number 18 Florida State. This is on at 7:30 on ABC at Doak Campbell Stadium. The Hurricanes are leaving the comforts of home for the first time this season. They've had a tough schedule: Notre Dame, South Florida, but all those games have been at home, so they're going on the road for the first time. I think that's kind of something to note in this game. Meanwhile, the Seminoles look for a bounce back after that surprising Friday night loss on the road to Virginia in 2 overtimes. The road for both of these teams going forward looks pretty manageable. So the winner of this game, to me, almost clinches their spot in the ACC championship game. Of course, there are still those hurdles that both teams will have to be careful not to look past, like Florida State got caught doing last week. But even if Florida State loses, they could still finish with 2 losses, but I think this one is really big for Florida State because Miami can probably afford to lose this one, and as long as it doesn't come down to them and Florida State then for a tiebreaker, they're probably still in the ACC championship game with a shot to get to the playoff. But again, kind of an easy road after this. This is a huge game for both, though, especially for Florida State. I think 2 losses probably going to be too much to get into the playoff to overcome that. Miami, if they lose, they still have some wiggle room, but not very much after that. Looking at the matchup side of things, starting with the Miami offense versus the Florida State defense, you've got Carson Beck, who's thrown for almost 1,000 yards so far through 4 games, 7 touchdowns. He has thrown 3 interceptions. His receivers are Malachi Toney and C.J. Daniels, and then Mark Fletcher is the leading running back for the Canes. Defensively, Earl Little Jr. leads the way for the Florida State defense, and then Jerry Wilson has a couple of interceptions, so keep an eye on him, how he does at reading the eyes of Carson Beck. And then Ashlyn Barker has 2 pass deflections and 2 sacks. So again, another guy who kind of has an impact, especially in the passing game. Fletcher and Miami can run the ball. I think they're going to probably rely on the passing game a little bit more in this one, so look for kind of some of those FSU defenders to keep an eye on. Quarterback Tommy Castellanos is definitely a dual threat quarterback, obviously, for the Seminoles. He's thrown for about 850 passing yards, 217 rushing yards, and 8 total touchdowns. He's got running back Gavin Sawchuk, and then wide receiver Deuce Robinson at his disposal as well. The big matchup here, you've got the number 2 rushing offense in the country. The Seminoles are second in rushing yards per game, going up against the number 8 rush defense of the Miami Hurricanes. A big part of that, Ruben Bain, probably one of the best defensive players in college football, and then Akeem Mesidor, who could also provide some issues for Castellanos, both in the pocket and even when he tries to scramble. So I think Miami has the right guys on defense. I think they've got a really high-powered offense. They've got some guys who can go up and make the plays. They've got a guy in Carson Beck that if he's protected, he's a really good quarterback, probably one of the top 10 in college football. I think Miami, it's close in this one. I think they get a win on the road. I'm going with Miami 27, Florida State 23. Next up, a game that 5 years ago, if you said this was going to be a ranked matchup, people would think you were out of your mind. But Vanderbilt, Clark Lee has turned the ship around there for the Commodores. You got number 16 Vanderbilt at 5-0 at number 10 Alabama, who's 3-1. This game is 3:30 Eastern on ABC, and we've got a matchup of probably 2 of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, and that's proven by passer efficiency rating. I think both of these guys are somewhere over 170 or over 175. In that stat. Diego Pavia has 1,200 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he's rushed for almost 300 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. On the other side is Ty Simpson. He's been one of the cleanest, most improved throwers of the football this season, and something that Joel Klatt mentioned this week, kind of a little comment that I thought is kind of interesting, the difference between somebody who throws the ball and somebody who passes the ball. Somebody who throws the ball probably can put a lot of zip on the ball, really throw it downfield, but somebody who passes the ball has kind of some more of that precision. I think Simpson has a lot of that precision. He's yet to throw an interception through 4 games, and he's thrown for over 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns. The top 2 targets for these guys, or I guess the top few targets, tight end Eli Stowers has 301 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns for the Commodores, and then Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams, those 2 guys have combined for over 500, right about 550 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Obviously, Williams is their main guy, but at times, he's a little bit hit or miss. Isaiah Horton is another guy to keep an eye on. He had a good game last week against Georgia, so keep an eye on those guys. Stowers is a really good tight end, so kind of keep an eye on how the linebackers and maybe some of those cornerbacks come up to defend him as well. Defensively, the leading guys for both of these teams are kind of on that line of scrimmage. Miles Capers has 3.5 sacks for Vanderbilt. LT Overton has 1.5 sacks for the Crimson Tide. To me, the big question here is how can the Vanderbilt running attack do against the Crimson Tide? Alabama's kind of struggled to defend the run at times this year. I kind of highlighted that, I think, ahead of their game against Georgia, because I thought the Bulldogs might be able to exploit that. Georgia didn't really, but Vandy has a really good rushing attack, and it really was kind of a big part of their upset win at home last year over Alabama. You've got obviously Pavia at quarterback, and then you've also got Cedric Alexander and Macklin Young. I do think, though, this time, the fact that it's at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa, I think that is a huge environment. It's the type of environment, though, that a quarterback of the personality of Diego Pavia really kind of feeds off of. So I do think that's something to watch. I don't think Alabama wins by a lot in this one, but I am going to go with Alabama 35, Vanderbilt 28. Next up, another game that going into things ahead of the season looked really interesting, but really has kind of faded after really kind of how both of these teams have performed. But it's number 9 Texas at Florida, 3-1 Longhorns at 1-3 Gators. There's kind of injury concerns for both teams at running back. Texas is for sure going to be without C.J. Baxter. Trey Wisner is also questionable in this game. Ball, the running back for the Gators, is also dealing with some injuries. Not a lot of depth for the Gators either at running back. A key thing here is going to be how the Texas pass rush does. They haven't really gotten into form yet. Colin Simmons, I think, finally got their first sack last week, or the last game against Sam Houston State. They're 8th in the SEC in terms of sacks. So it wasn't their first, but he kind of finally got into what we maybe expected from them. Another big thing here, how does Arch Manning perform this time in another road environment? This is his second time going on the road, and when you're talking about the history of college football, Ohio State and Florida, first 2 road games at the Shoe and in the Swamp, those are 2 tough places to get started. I think he's a lot better even than he was in week 1 with a young quarterback. There's going to be so much exponential growth, and I think he's on that steady curve right now. Another thing too, DJ Lagway, defenses have seemed to figure him out. Will that be the same with Texas? Texas has one of the best defenses in college football. I think so. I'm going to go with Texas 27, Florida 17. There's a lot of other games that are kind of like intriguing, but not quite worth devoting a bunch of time to. Number 11, Texas Tech at Houston. This is an interesting game. 2 good quarterbacks, Baron Morton, Connor Wiegman. You've also got defensive coordinator Shane Wood, who's going back to Houston. He also, linebacker A.J. Holmes for Texas Tech, also played at Houston, so a little bit of intrigue there. Houston has the number 11 pass defense, and Texas Tech has the number 1 passing offense, so kind of strength versus strength here. I think Texas Tech's defense is too much. A game wrecker like Jacob Rodriguez will be an impact player here, and even though it's on the road, I think the Red Raiders get the win. And then kind of going over some other intriguing games. Kentucky at Georgia, number 12 Georgia, coming off that loss to Alabama. Kentucky played spoiler last year for Ole Miss. They beat the Rebels in Oxford. So certainly keep an eye on this game. I'm not calling the upset, but just saying keep an eye on this one. I do think the Dogs get the win here. Number 14, Iowa State at Cincinnati. When you talk about potential upsets, one that would throw a big wrench into the Big 12 picture, here's one right here. But I do think Rocco Becht is an experienced quarterback who can lead this Iowa State offense. I think their defense has played well this year as well, so I'm going with the Cyclones there. Wisconsin at number 20, Michigan. This is the big noon kickoff game. Wolverines have looked a lot better against the pass. Not against the pass. They've looked a lot better passing the ball. Obviously, their strength is running, but that's like the one strength that the Badgers have is their running defense. However, I think going to be too much there at the Big House. I think the Wolverines win comfortably. Maybe not quite roll, but I think they win comfortably there. Clemson at UNC at North Carolina. Obviously, the Tigers are one of the biggest disappointments in college football this season, and it doesn't really get too much easier. I know the Tar Heels are 2-2, and they've got that whirlwind storm around them with everything with Bill Belichick, but that kind of has kind of settled down now that the team is out there on the field playing games. So this is a tough environment for Clemson to go into. I think they do get the win, but I'm not super confident in that pick, if I'm being honest with you. I think Dabo will get this team clicking, but seeing them finish with more than 8 wins this season, I don't really expect to happen. I do think they get one here. Boise State at number 21, Notre Dame. Another game that kind of had higher stakes, but Notre Dame's lost to Miami and Texas A&M. Boise State obviously lost to South Florida. However, Boise State, if you have every team in the American Conference with at least one loss and you have South Florida with 2 or more, Boise State will still be in a good position, even if they lose this one, but they'd want Notre Dame probably to win out. And for Notre Dame, you just kind of have to avoid, easing up because Boise State is certainly the team with the pedigree to pull an upset. However, I think Notre Dame wins. 2 improving, surging teams in the ACC. Number 24, Virginia against Louisville. This one's in Louisville. 4-0 Cardinals against the 4-1 Cavaliers. I think Chandler Morris is the difference maker here. Miller Moss is a good quarterback for Louisville, but I think Morris has a lot of experience. I think that plays to his advantage here on the road. I'm going with the Cavaliers pulling the upset on the road. Washington at Maryland, 2 solid teams out of the Big Ten with 2 electric young quarterbacks. You've got DeMond Williams, who was certainly limited last week against the best defense in college football against Ohio State, and you've got Malik Washington on the other side, who's a really good quarterback for the Terrapins. I think the Terrapins, though, their schedule has been pretty easy. Washington's was pretty easy as well up until the Ohio State game. I think they probably were able to see some things they could work on. I'm going to go with Washington here, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Terps win at home. Syracuse at SMU. Obviously for the Orange, the big loss here of Steve Angeli. SMU started out 2-2. They're in a position, though, they've still got the pieces in place to try to compete for that ACC title. I think they get kind of on the road towards that with a win here in what I think is their ACC opener. Michigan State at Nebraska. Another interesting quarterback matchup here. Couple good defenses. You got Aiden Childs against Dylan Raiola. I think the Huskers win at home. Then finally, rounding it out with a couple of games, Mississippi State at number 6, Texas A&M. Now, the Bulldogs, looking at how they played last year, 2 wins, none in SEC play. You would think I'd be crazy for highlighting this game, but they're 4-1. They upset the reigning Big 12 champions and college football playoff participants, I guess, Arizona State. And then they played Tennessee really tough last week as well. So they're going into College Station, going into Kyle Field. I think it will be a tough environment, but I think the Bulldogs maybe keep it closer than the spread indicates. Going with the Bulldogs to cover, but I got A&M winning that one. And then finally, a very intriguing night game. You've got Duke, who, especially for me, I had a lot of expectations on them going into the season. And then you've got Cal, who's kind of been surpassing expectations that a lot of people had. They're 4-1, playing pretty well. They kind of had that, we'll see whether that game was fluky or other ones. 34-0 loss to San Diego State is how they played in that game. What they will be like against Duke, or will it be how they've played in these other games to get out to that 4-1 start? I think this is an interesting game here, so definitely worth maybe staying up to watch this one, and could be that type of game that's just a fun, entertaining one to watch. I've got the Blue Devils winning in Berkeley, but that is all for this episode of College Football Talk. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on what your picks are for this week, and if there's any big games maybe that I missed. I know I didn't do a group of 5 watch, but that's honestly because it's a little bit of a slower week, I'll say, in the group of 5. Not a lot of huge matchups, kind of like there were last week. But I'll definitely be keeping an eye on the group of 5, and if anything major happens, I'll break that down in my week 6 takeaways video. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.